Rate Your Music, if you're unfamiliar, is the letterboxd of the music world. If that didn't help you, it's a website used by somewhere around 1.5 million users where they catalog and rank music albums. That probably doesn't sound enticing, and quite frankly, it isn't. But I think it's a cool benchmark to see what the internet as a culture deemed to be the best albums of all time. Today I'm going to take a look at the top 50 albums of all time on Rate Your Music. I'm going to rank them in the correct order they should be in, which, quite frankly, is incredibly different from how they're ordered. By correct, of course, I mean correct in my opinion, as once again, for that one guy in my comments, music is art, and is therefore completely subjective. If you disagree, I don't actually care. With that little preamble out of the way, let's hop into Rate Your Music's 50th best album of all time. At number 50, it's In a Silent Way by Miles Davis. Miles Davis, a name I'm sure you've heard at this point in your life. Absolutely legendary jazz musician that truthfully I don't know nearly enough about, and I'm not really going to pretend to. Released on July 30th, 1969, at perhaps the height of the jazz movement. I completely made that up, don't read into it. In a Silent Way is argued as Mr. Davis's magnum opus, but not his only appearance on this list today. Honestly, I like this a lot. Very soothing piece top to bottom, and though there were only 2 individual tracks here, it really felt like one giant sandwich, if that makes sense to you. The progression between the two felt magical to me, Long Season-esque, if you're familiar with their game. But instrumentally, this just paints a picture of a genuine master musician, throwing everything he's got at the wall, and watching every fucking thing he threw land. This is peak shit. Let's get it on the board. At number 49, it's the White Album by the Beatles. Hopefully you weren't satisfied with my relatively lukewarm take on that last project, because I'm here to tell you this project is fairly overrated, I'm afraid. Released on November 22nd, 1968, our second 60s entrance on the list. Makes you think. Anyway, for those unfamiliar, I suppose, the White Album is extremely well representative of the band's state at the time, and that is incredibly disjointed. The band was already the biggest group on the earth, so finding time to record was no easy feat, not to mention the Yoko Ono incident, and the ongoing battles between the band members. To circumvent these slight issues, they just recorded by themselves. It's an album with incredible highs, like While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Happiness is a Warm Gun, but I implore you, dear viewer, to look directly into my aviator sunglasses and tell me this is a consistently great album. I believe it's the Beatles' longest record at 93 minutes, and it genuinely feels that way. A lot of fluff, a lot of filler, and I think a relatively overrated project. Going behind Mr. Davis for this one. These bastards are already wrong. At number 48, it's Either Or by Elliott Smith. Either Or is an album incredibly near and dear to the hearts of many, myself kind of slightly included, I'd say. My love for the album is far newer, but it's really an album you can just kind of sit with and relate to. Kind of feel what Mr. Elliott Smith was going through at the time, in one of the most raw and visceral ways I've heard in album form. Released on February 27th, 1997, it's an album that would only predate his death by about half a decade. An album that transcribes depression and sorrow to an uncomfortable degree, to be honest. The highs here are fantastic. My favorites are probably Ballad of Big Nothing and Say Yes, but this is a project with really no hope, unlike the Beatles kerfuffle I just touched on. Very good album, deserving of the top 50 spot, I'd say. My favorite so far. Let's get it at the top of the board.
I've been waiting for a guy to come and take me by the hand.
Number 47, it's Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division. Argued as the late and great Ian Curtis's magnum opus, and really I can't see much of an argument for anything else in his catalog. Really one of the greatest creative minds to ever bless this plane of existence, and it's music that's tragically aided by his own death in the not-too-distant future after this release. Released on June 14th, 1979, it's a very similar album conceptually to that last Elliott Smith record, to be honest. It paints this picture of sorrow and depression in ways I kind of struggle to put into words. An incredibly personal project, albeit not the most consistent thing I've ever heard by any means. The highs here are excellent, though, most notably the opening track, Disorder. That track, I think, perfectly defines this record. It's such an anxiety-inducing and just emotional piece. Not even sure how much I really enjoy this record, but it does exactly what it sets out to do in a way that most other albums kind of struggle to accomplish. I'm going behind Mr. Davis on the board here.
I'd rather live outside.
Number 46, it's Blonde by Frank Ocean. First record of the 21st century to make the list, Frank Ocean's Blonde. Released on August 20th, 2016, and widely considered a classic on release. A concept album, I believe. That concept? I don't know. But it causes the album to flow incredibly well, every track kind of leading into the next, both narratively and sonically. My favorites here, of course, the iconic Pink and White, but another one I absolutely love is Siegfried. It's got this very melancholic guitar riff present throughout, and just like every other song on the album, shows a very vulnerable side of Mr. Ocean. Very personal album that I know a lot of people have connected to. Maybe if I give it another couple listens, it'd make a little more sense to a guy like me. But it's never really been an absolute personal favorite of mine. I guess if I had to assign a culprit, it'd be a lot of the interludes just don't really click with me. A lot of the longer tracks that are given more time, I enjoy. Some of the shorter ones end up a bit stinkier. Facebook Story comes to mind in that category. I'm going to go above the White Album here. Number 45, it's Homogenic by Bjork. Björk is an artist I'm relatively new to entirely, always a name I'd heard around, never really willing to dive into that pool for whatever reason. Upon diving into the pool being Vespertine, I had one of those Danny DeVito moments, you know the one. Homogenic, while not quite as good as that record, has very similar peaks, I'd say, released on September 22nd, 1997, and serves as her third studio record. Homogenic has a very unique sound to it, just like the rest of Björk's catalog. It's relatively unclassifiable. It's a very bold fusion of electronic and almost classical music and some of the orchestral work. It just makes this sound so serenely beautiful and also kind of chaotic. I think it works beautifully here on this album, especially on tracks like Yoga and Hunter, two of my favorite songs from Miss Björk, period. Only thing that really holds this project back for me is its comparison to Vespertine. They both got very similar sounds to them, very similar concepts. I just find Vespertine to be kind of executed better. Peak stuff, though. I'm going to go above Frank Ocean here. At number 44, it's What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. Ain't nothing gay about this one, fellas. Not my best work, sorry about that. Released on May 21st, 1971, classified as progressive soul, a genre I can't say I'm too familiar with, but it's hard to not gel with this project. A very light album, heavily aided by Marvin Gaye's relatively goat-like vocal performance here. Really, it's the message that I think causes discussion on this album 55 years after its release. It's a message that I think will forever need to be heard, one that genuinely will probably never lose prevalence. What is going on, fellas? The world turns to shit and seems to continue to turn to shit every day, and it's albums like this that provide a glimmer of optimism, one you can really look at in multiple ways. If you're a negative Nancy, these problems have been persisting for the last 55 years and nothing has changed. Or if you're a positive Patrick, it shows that art will always be a medium to express the soul and the desires of mankind. And Marvin's desire here was to express the injustice he saw around him. My favorite track, to no one's surprise, I don't think, is the title track here, but really the whole album is consistently fantastic. 44 feels a little low to a guy like me. We'll see where it ends up on my list. I'm going to go top of the board for now. Number 43 is Discovery by Daft Punk. This right here is simply a great time. No other way to put it, really. A lot of the top dogs on websites like these usually end up being, quite frankly, the most miserable shit you've ever heard. I think it's a lot easier to transcribe sorrow and sadness into a song than it is a euphoric joy like this. But when it's done well, it creates an album almost in its own league. Released on March 12, 2001, it's an album with genuinely unreal production, flawless use of samples, and some goddamn incredible instrumental work all around it. Daft Punk's an artist I've always been indifferent towards, solely because of the existence of the song Get Lucky, which I hate more than words can truly describe. I've drawn this picture in Microsoft Paint to hopefully illustrate my distaste for the song Get Lucky. This album's fantastic though, top to bottom, every song here puts a wide toothy grin on my face. I'm gonna go above Unknown Pleasures.
Woke up, fell out of bed, dragged a comb across my head.
Number 42, it's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. Never really got this one either, to be honest. Don't peg me as a Beatles hater just yet, dear viewer. This is Rate Your Music we're talking about. They'll be on this list around 122 more times, but these first two entries from the fellas I find to be some of the weaker projects on this list so far. Another very similar case to that of the White Album, to be honest. When this album is good, it's surreally good. A Day in the Life, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, these are all-time classic tracks, and I'm not here to fight your uncle in that regard. The rest of this project, though, it's kinda no? A lot of holes on this project, particularly kind of the middle third of this. I find myself kind of trudging through to get to A Day in the Life, which I will again reiterate in the event that you forgot the last 15 seconds, is one of the greatest songs ever. Still not here to fight that, but do let me know the last time you jumped out of bed, smile on your face, and threw on Within You Without You, or When I'm 64, or Fixing a Hole. These are kind of mid songs, fellas, sorry. I do think its runtime does give it the edge over the White Album. I'd also say this has higher highs than the White Album. This isn't going to end too pretty for the gang here. I'm going to go right above the White Album on the board.
I drove up to the city and found a place where
Number 41, it's The Glow Part 2 by The Microphones. Their album I think is just a touch overglazed. We've got The Glow Part 2, released on fucking 9/11. Let me tell you something, dear viewer. The last thing anyone on the planet needed on 9/11 was The Glow Part 2. The Microphones, led by Mr. Phil Elverum, are known for their incredibly personal and touching lyricism, and that's perhaps clearest on this project right here. Or maybe the Mount Erie one, but that one's not on the list. It's classified as psychedelic folk, which I think categorizes the album fairly well. It's very unique in its sound scope, but it stays true to these folksy roots while vastly expanding upon those sounds. The opening three tracks here are genuinely some of the best I've ever heard, both lyrically and sonically. They just bring so much to the dinner table. The instrumental work here so perfectly mimics the lyrical kind of intensity throughout the project. As the words become more erratic, so does the music. Pretty stuff, never really been a favorite project of mine as a whole, to be honest. I think once again the middle third here leaves a little to be desired, but the front and back thirds here are seriously excellent. Going behind Homogenic on the board. At number 40, it's The Queen is Dead by The Smiths. The Smiths, oh, The Smiths, the performative band of your older brother's time, quickly replaced by Deftones by the Zoomers. But The Smiths had a fairly legendary run in the 80s. The Queen is Dead is widely regarded as their magnum opus, and for good reason. Does it belong in the top 50? I'd go with a fuck no, but I don't make the rules. Released on June 16, 1986, at the height of the Smiths' success. This album is some of their biggest songs ever, like There's a Light That Never Goes Out and I Know It's Over, and I capitalized but in the script here. There's a lot of mid on here, man. More than there probably should be. I'd give this album a lukewarm 9 out of 10 and call it a day. Of course, that's underselling this record's influence, perhaps, but I live in today, not yesterday. Write that down if you want. Frankly, Mr. Shankly, Vicar in a Tutu, Never Had No One Ever. These are songs I'm not revisiting outside of a top-to-bottom listen to this project. It's a very touching album lyrically, I think. Very interesting lyricism across the board and some very tender tracks. Had Morrissey not grown into perhaps the worst person I know, a lot of these songs wouldn't leave the bitter taste in my mouth that they kind of do in the big 2026. I'm going to go back of the board for now. Number 39, it's Souvlaki by Slowdive. A little shoegazy goodness finally enters the list. I'm surprised we lasted this long. These Rate Your Music fellas will die on the shoegaze hill. Me, not so much. I can appreciate good shoegaze, however, and unlike another project we'll see far too high on this list, this is an all-time classic. Released on June 1st, 1993, I can't call it the most influential project in the genre, but I think I could easily see an argument that this is the genre's peak. Tracks like Allison, When the Sun Hits, Souvlaki's Space Station, these are all-time classics within the genre. Absolutely mesmerizing production top to bottom, incredible guitar work top to bottom, and some damn beautiful poetry to put a nice little bow on the whole thing. That's what it's all about right here. Going behind Elliott Smith on the board here.
And one day we will die, and our ashes will fly from the air.
Number 38, it's In the Airplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel. This one here is an incredibly divisive album. I've never met a motherfucker in my life that was indifferent to this project. You think it's either actually surpassed sliced bread as an invention, or you think it sucks balls. Me? I think it kind of sucks balls. Sucking balls is perhaps a bit disingenuous, but I just don't really get the appeal of a project like this. It's all pretty sound stuff, instrumentally incredible at times, but the vocal delivery and lyricism here I just find it fall kind of incredibly flat, at least on my ears. A couple highlights here are the title track and Holland 1945, but almost every other track is kind of forgettable in my mind. I understand the love for this project for sure. I don't hate you if you like this, but I've always found it to be a shoulder shrug, at best, for myself. Going back of the board.
Pink moon is on its way.
Number 37, Pink Moon by Nick Drake. I was once a hater of this project. I'm not really sure why, I don't actually remember. Coming back to this, there's a very surreal beauty throughout this entire project. Lyrically and sonically, it reminds me a lot of Elliott Smith kind of before Elliott Smith. Very simplistic melodies, but those melodies used as a vehicle to kind of etch his lyrics into your soul. Very laid-back stuff, tracks like Place to Be and of course the title track, the two highlights for me. This project is very damn consistent throughout its only 28-minute runtime. It would serve as his final work, released on February 25th, 1972. Just 2 years before his untimely death in 1974. Makes this piece all the more haunting, as it often does with musicians like this. Kind of his lasting impression upon this earth, his final piece of artistry, and it vividly displays his mental state at the time, I think, while also having these beautifully light vocals and guitar work. It's pretty peak, man. I was wrong last time. I'm behind Slowdive on the board here.
Off the fucking block, now clock and wristlet watch been top off.
Number 36, The Money Store by Death Grips. On to The Money Store. Another project you either love, or people will try to convince you you're too dumb to understand. Some very abrasive music. I think that's the best way to describe it. Experimental hip-hop is not a genre for the weak by any means, but even considering that genre, this is some of the hardest shit to get into in even that music scene. If you're able to drag your balls through the mile of glass and wrap your head around this music, you will come to discover some borderline sensational musicianship here. MC Ride, the rapper at the helm here, has a very tough voice for me to enjoy, to be honest. Very tough flow to follow. And it's probably my least favorite part of their music, period. Sorry to those I've offended, but his lyricism is undeniably pretty excellent. Everything else, though, absurdly good. Production is absolutely off the charts throughout this project and most of their projects. The drums, the song structures, it's a project unlike anything else I've ever heard from a band, unlike any other band I've ever heard. Some highlights here include the opening track, Get Got, my personal favorite, I've Seen Footage. Just some very aggressive and well-made shit. Perfect for when you decide to, hypothetically speaking of course, drive your car as fast as you physically can on the highway. Going above Sgt. Pepper's for this one.
I miss you.
At number 35, it's Spiderland by Slint. It's another one people will try to make you feel dumb for if you don't like. This time, I agree with those guys, though. They're onto something. Released on March 27th, 1991, and often cited as an incredibly influential album within the post-rock and math rock scenes. An incredibly uncomfortable album to listen to, etched, of course, by the music itself, but most notably by the vocals here. They're delivered in a very deadpan way, spoken word even, and it's that style of vocal matched perfectly by the dark instrumentation that makes the magic here. Good Morning Captain, one of my favorite album closers of all time, perhaps expresses that in the cleanest way. It's a very straightforward yet ominous narrative, like it's going to erupt at some point, and when it finally does on this closing track, it feels like a genuinely perfect moment in music. An album I'll probably never forget hearing for the first time. Give this one a glance, dear viewer. I think you'll like it. That's you specifically, not the other people watching this. Tippity top of the board today. Number 34, it's Enter the Wu-Tang by Wu-Tang Clan. Enter the Wu, one of the two 90s hip-hop records in the top 50 here, and that angers me to a point that I'm unable to convey in simple terms. Absolutely deserving of this spot, though, I'd say. Really, any way you want to tackle it. Its influence on the hip-hop scene can't really be understated. Kind of paved the way for a lot of your favorite hip-hop artists. And even excluding the influence, the music itself has aged incredibly well, a lot better than a lot of hip-hop projects around this time. Enter the Wu released on November 9th, 1993, and kind of invented sampling, low-key. That's not true at all, but they were crucial in that change in the scene. Sonically, though, this brings an energy so raw, so vulgar, and so defining of that time period, it's hard to not look back at this project with tears in my eyes. Iconic tracks on here as well, like Cream, Shame on a Fella, and of course, Protect Your Neck. Just a very consistent project top to bottom, zero holes, excellent vocal chemistry from the fellas here, and an album that changed the music world with its very existence. Top of the board. At number 33, it's Dummy by Portishead. Oh yeah, this is some peak shit right here. Portishead's Dummy, released on August 22nd of 1994, effectively cementing the trip-hop genre's place in the relative mainstream. Beth Gibbons on the microphone here delivers maybe just the greatest performance of all time, something like that. Such an eerie album as well, far better experience that night for sure, but everything here just echoes creepiness to me. The production here is absolutely elite. Guitar work and some of the sampling is just used to absolute perfection. Really one of the most complete projects I've ever heard. Not a skip on this bad, Larry. Top to bottom, a wide smile on my face. Albeit not the widest smile, I'm a little scared. Some highlights here for me are Mysterons, which sounds an awful lot like Mysterion, and of course the legendary Glory Box, which just closes this album to an absolute masterpiece. Incredible project. 33 feels a little low to a guy like me, to be honest. We'll see how it goes. Top of the board from me.
And I still won't grow up. I'm a grown-ass kid. Swear I should be locked up for stupid.
Number 32, it's The College Dropout by Kanye West. Oh Kanye, what happened to you, my beloved? Once upon a time, maybe the greatest producer ever. Nowhere is that clearer than on his debut record, The College Dropout, released on February 10th, 2004, and absolutely shaking the hip-hop scene. An album unlike any other of its time, really. Very tight concept skits, which I usually find distinct, used very sparingly and pretty well, I think, on this album. Beautifully flowing project top to bottom with some of my favorite Kanye tracks, period, like Jesus Walks and Through the Wire and 2 Words. So many goats on this project. Not to even mention some of the features here that are just absolutely fantastic. Selena Johnson on All Falls Down, Jay-Z on Never Let Me Down, Jamie Foxx on Slow Jams, Mos Def on 2 Words. There's just too many to fucking count. It's quite honestly the quintessential hip-hop album of the early 2000s, if you ask me, in really every regard. Beautifully defines that chapter of his life and sounds incredible while doing it. Peak shit from Mr. West. I'm going behind Dummy on the board.
Let's have a toast for the douchebags. Let's have a toast for the asshole.
Number 31, it's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy by Kanye West. Doubling up on our Kanye West here, we've got this slightly inferior project, if you ask me. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy released half a decade later on November 22nd, 2010. This would be Kanye's final project you'd listen to and go, holy fuck, that was sick. A slight decline following this one, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. This album has perhaps an even better concept than The College Dropout, or at the very least a far more personal one to Kanye. It tells the tale of addiction, not a really crazy concept for an album, but an addiction to sex itself. Something many people are still kind of ashamed of. Very personal and just open-hearted record top to bottom. Tracks like Runaway, so vividly displaying his struggle. It's also got some all-time classics on here, like All of the Lights and Dark Fantasy. It's just a very complete project. Blame Game is pretty mid, though. But other than that, no skips from me, and a fantastic piece, both sonically and lyrically. From one of the greatest to ever do it. Going above Slow Dive on the board here. At number 30, it's Long Season by Fishmans. Come on now, if you know my game, you know this is my goat. One singular 36-minute long song, and truthfully not a moment wasted, except maybe the weird plip-plop segment, but we don't talk about it. Released on October 25th, 1996, and is widely regarded as the great Shinji Sato's magnum opus. Everything about this is perfect, to be honest. The production, the guitar work, the vocals. But what I think is absolutely unreal is the structure of this song. To keep me so genuinely engaged in one song for almost 40 minutes, and over 40 minutes on the live rendition, is genuinely a feat I don't think I've heard any other band achieve. So much to love here, the build-up, the long piano sections, but the conclusion of this track is just so indescribably legendary to me. Every moment perfectly crafted to lead into this kind of explosion of instrumentation. The genuinely grand finale. I can't explain my love for this song, that's the best I could do. Top of the board for my goat. Number 29, it's Heaven or Las Vegas by the Cocteau Twins. From one dream pop masterpiece to another, Cocteau Twins' Heaven or Las Vegas. I don't think you're going to like what I have to say, so I'm just bracing you for the impact here. I love this album. The highs of this album are genuinely indescribable. The title track, Cherry Colored Funk, and my personal favorite, Fro Fro Foxes, all 10 out of 10 songs that I'll genuinely throw on any day and either smile or cry violently. The rest of this album, kind of samey, no? 3 genuinely legendary peaks, but the rest of this album is almost indiscernible from one another. It's a great sound and the album itself progresses really well. But at points of this album, I do kind of get a little bored. Off the back of its peaks, this probably does have an argument to be this high, but a lot of this album is kind of a little forgettable to a guy like me. Sorry, dear viewer. Love Slowdive on the board here.
Are we still friends?
Number 28, it's Igor by Tyler, the Creator. Peak shit from Mr. Creator right here. Incredibly tight concept album that I know a lot of people hold incredibly near and dear to their hearts. I get it, I think, but really this album has it all. Incredible production, incredible flow, incredible lyricism. At points, I'll admit the vocals can be a little abrasive, but I think it's part of the charm here, part of how personal this album and a lot of his music kind of is. It takes hip-hop and transforms it into this kind of psychedelic experience in a way very few other hip-hop albums have ever even attempted to do. One of the most ambitious albums I've ever heard, and the execution is kind of just as good as that idea was. Some of my favorites here are Gone Gone and Are We Still Friends, but you really can't go wrong with most of this album. Going behind Heaven or Las Vegas on the board here.
God only knows what I'd be without you.
Number 27, it's Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. 27 of all time feels ambitious for this project, but honestly, I think I get it. Super peak album, very laid back soundscope, and for the 1960s, the production here is pretty damn good. A couple vocal sequences I was genuinely surprised by, but a lot of the charm here just comes from the vibes once again. The vibes are so high here, another wide smile on my face throughout. Now you throw on and just lay your ass on the beach. Maybe that's why they're the Beach Boys. Some absolute classics on here like Wouldn't It Be Nice and God Only Knows, but truthfully, this entire project is pretty enjoyable top to bottom. It's got great flow, great lyricism, and some excellent writing across the board from the late Brian Wilson. There is a sorrow in this project, and I think that's kind of what makes it so captivating. Beneath all this light and fairly upbeat instrumentation, there's this underlying darkness to this project. It's very faint at points, but this project is almost a little bittersweet. Very good stuff, though. Going above Slowdive for today.
Isn't she lovely? I've been
Number 26, it's Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. Egregiously low for this record, and that's at the 26th spot. Those Cats on Album of the Year got this at the 2 spot. I'm somewhere in between these two omniscient beings, but I think the Album of the Year cats are closer to the mark. A double album with 0 skips is a feat pretty much lost to time at this point, and it's another similar case where I can't physically stop myself from smiling when I listen to this project. So much music echoes sadness and depression like I mentioned earlier, and it's important they do so. Using music to kind of connect with those parts of yourself is important. But so is the opposite. Released on September 28, 1976, to immediate critical acclaim, Songs in the Key of Life is genuinely one of the most positive pieces of art I've ever seen in my life. Tracks like Sir Duke, I Wish, Pastime Paradise, Knocks Me Off My Feet, Summer Soft, that's just the first fucking disc. Isn't She Lovely? Maybe just one of the greatest songs ever? I don't know. But it just captures these much-needed moments of bliss within the music industry, that in spite of the terrible shit going on, there's so much beauty to be found in life. And that's what Stevie Wonder set out to spread the word of. I haven't even talked about the fucking music yet. Masterfully done yet again. Vocals are excellent, instrumental work is excellent. Every fucking thing about this goddamn album is damn near perfect. I'm going behind Long Season on the board. That's just how hard my bias goes. Number 25, it's Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. Absurdly peak, to be honest. Miles Davis' second and final appearance on the top 50 here, and I gotta say my favorite of the two projects comfortably. First record was more of a jazz fusion project released a little bit later in Miles' career, this one a bit earlier, dating back to August 17th of 1959. Bearing that in mind, this project becomes even more mind-boggling, but simultaneously I think it serves as a far simpler jazz piece that benefits greatly from that simplicity. Vibes are absolutely ludicrous here, some of the greatest instrumental work I've ever heard in my entire life, and again, this album is almost 70 years old, which is just fucking nuts. My personal favorite track here is Blue and Green, but truthfully the entire album is an absolute must-listen. It's quite honestly increased my interest in jazz to levels I struggle to put into words. Absolute masterpiece of a record. Going behind Stevie on the board here. At number 24, it's Red by King Crimson. At this point in the list, we're pretty much getting 10 out of 10 records across the board. Not all of them, you'll see, but King Crimson's Red is no different, I wouldn't say. Absolutely sensational prog rock piece, easily rivaling some of the top dogs within that genre. Think Wish You Were Here, or Dark Side of the Moon, released on October 6th, 1974, just a touch after Dark Side, but predating most other legendary prog records. Got maybe the greatest song of all time in the closer, Starless here, which is just an absolute must-listen if you haven't heard it. The instrumental work here just shows so vividly the ceilings of prog rock, to degrees that shouldn't have even really been reachable at the time. Though Starless is the obvious crowned jewel here, tracks like Fallen Angel and One More Red Nightmare I'd also argue are absolute classic tracks. Providence kinda stinks though, and on a record with only 5 songs, having a sort of miss is a damaging thing, I'm afraid. Regardless, great project. Going behind Dummy on the board here. Number 23, it's Animals by Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd's first appearance on the list, but certainly not their last. Some people will try to convince you this is their best work. I'm not one of those people. But this album might have their greatest song ever in Dogs. Incredibly tight concept record. I really like the Animal Farm angle they went with, and I think it's an album that aged incredibly well conceptually. Though Dogs is the obvious highlight with its brilliant use of, quite honestly, everything. Pigs and Sheep are also two nigh 10 out of 10 songs, beautifully fitting the concept and really elevating this entire album. The shorter record and really the opener and closer serves almost interludes of a sort. The meat and potatoes of this album is genuinely indescribably good. 23 makes sense to a guy like me for this project, though I imagine it'll end up higher on my list due to my genuine obsession with Pink Floyd's 70s run. Going behind Stevie for Animals. Number 22, it's A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. Pretty fantastic piece right here. Again, my knowledge of jazz is fairly limited. Just about to what I've talked to up until this point in the video, to be frank. But I gotta say my socks are still on my feet here. Maybe Kind of Blue just kind of blew my expectations out of the water. Did you catch that? That one was tricky. Released in January of 1965, the album serves as perhaps a more complex piece than Kind of Blue, but I almost feel like it loses something because of that. Kind of Blue felt like jazz in almost its purest form. This does a very similar thing. I just kind of find it less interesting. Maybe I shouldn't have listened to all of these in a week, but hindsight is 20/20, dear viewer. I think the album did get better as it went along. The last 2 pieces here are the highlight in my mind, but this is probably going to end up lower on the board, dear viewer. Going above the Smiths for now. Number 21, it's The Banana by The Velvet Underground and Nico. No way, man. I think this is another album that's influence shouldn't be understated. I get that. But this just doesn't sound that good, man. A couple pretty great tracks here, I think. Sunday Morning and Femme Fatale, probably my 2 favorites. But a lot of this just comes off as a little pretentious to me. Released on March 12, 1967, which I think is an incredibly important factor. Some of the structures and ideas pulled off here are incredibly impressive from a technical standpoint, but it's just not that fun of a listen. A lot of holes on here too, even given some of the tracks I don't personally love, like Heroin and Waiting for the Man, Their Flowers. Some of these tracks just kind of fucking suck. European Sun, perhaps the worst one here. This kind of displays the pretentiousness of this album, I think. Very abstract and loose song, but it's just not an enjoyable listen. A vaguely top 300 album, maybe? 21 of all time is ludicrous, I'm afraid. Still better than the Milk Hotel people, though. Number 20, it's The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady by Mingus. The final jazz inclusion of the list, and to be honest, I still don't think it surpasses Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. This project is absolutely incredible, though. Released in July of 1963, so slightly after Kind of Blue, but creating a far different atmosphere. If I describe Kind of Blue as more laid back, chill even, I'd call this one much more all over the place, much more energetic, I guess. Very complex across the board, a lot going on throughout the entire album. The whole project flows ludicrously well. A cool concept that I can't say I grasped from my initial listen, but I'll probably be back here. We'll see though, things change all the time. Very ambitious project though, and certainly an enjoyable listen. It's tough for me to differentiate a lot of this jazz on a quality scale, to be honest. They all kind of just set out to do different things, but do a great job of getting those points across. I think the track closes on its strongest track, if I had to pick, but once again, everything here is peak. Going behind Mr. Elliott Smith on the board here. Also going to move Heaven or Las Vegas above Mr. Elliott Smith. I've reflected. Number 19's Disintegration by The Cure. Oh, Disintegration. Genuinely a tough album for me to listen to, and it's just absolute flawless portrayal of despair. Many albums are sad, I'm sure you've heard a couple yourself, but truly no album paints this picture of heartache clearer than Disintegration. Released on May 2nd, 1989, would firmly place The Cure above the Smiths in any thinker's mind. It's got an incredibly atmospheric sound to it, top to bottom, beautiful and brilliant sequencing that once again paint this picture of melancholy and heartache to genuinely uncomfortable degrees. A couple all-time classics on here like Love Song and Disintegration, 2 songs that genuinely make me feel ill, but it's another album with almost unreal consistency. Every song here feels purposeful, necessary to the project structure. Another masterpiece, who would have thought? Going behind Long Season on the board. Number 18, it's Vespertine by Bjork. The one Bjork album I actually had heard before the making of this video, and of the 2 I've heard, which is admittedly a small sample size. This is by far her best work. Kind of similarly to Homogenic, it creates this blend of electronic with almost classical structures and instrumentation to create this ethereal atmosphere. Released on August 27, 2001, slingshotting Bjork into the 21st century with an all-time classic project. Is 18 a little high? I don't know. Maybe. I enjoy the album quite a bit, though. There aren't really any glaring holes here, and really I have no complaint. At this point in the list, it's a lot of personal preference. I find the album just to be a fuck ton to chew on. Some all-time classics on here, though. Pagan Poetry, of course. But my personal favorite, one of the greatest songs I've ever heard, the album closer, Unison. A very heartwarming conclusion, I think. A beautiful message to conclude a project like this on. And just absurd beauty found within it. Going behind Wu-Tang. Number 17, it's Paranoid by Black Sabbath. First and foremost, rest in peace to the GOAT, the father of metal, and one of the most legendary frontmans to have ever lived. Who else was eating bats on stage, dear viewer? Answer me that. Paranoid serves as perhaps the birth of the metal genre in its entirety. I'm sure if you looked long enough, you'd find a project that predates this, even Black Sabbath's own self-titled record, but this is truly when metal hit the map and quickly overtook the music scene. Released on September 18th, 1970, an album that holds up ludicrously well from a production standpoint, but more importantly from a musical one. The guitar work here from Mr. Tony Iommi is just absolutely legendary. The concept here, the tightness of the lyricism for such a heavy project is just something you don't really see anymore. Metal in its truest form, its bass line. To be honest, that kind of holds it back from being an all-time favorite of mine personally. It's an album that needs to exist. Its influence is not something I wish to undermine, but I'll spoil it for you. This is the first and last metal album in the top 50, which I think is a little nutty. I wouldn't call it the peak of metal myself, but with tracks like War Pigs and Paranoid and even Planet Caravan offering something completely different to the rest of the record, a strange psychedelic break in this heavy metal project. It's an album that will live in infamy for all eternity, and rightfully so, I think. Behind Mingus on the board here. Number 16 is Revolver by the Beatles. One of those albums that somehow feels just as revolutionary now as it must have in 1966. I don't know, I wasn't there. Revolver is the Beatles at the exact point where they stopped trying to be the biggest band in the world and started trying to expand upon their sound a little more, get a little more psychedelic. Released on August 5th, 1966, it's packed front to back with ideas that would go on to shape not only the Beatles' future, but kind of rock music for decades. From the psychedelic experimentation to kind of the obscure instrumentation, all without sacrificing the incredible songwriting that made them famous in the first place. Some absolute classics on here too that your uncle probably really likes. Taxman, Here, There, and Everywhere, Eleanor Rigby, Tomorrow Never Knows. Track list is just kind of stupid. If I had one complaint, and it's barely even a complaint, that I don't quite connect emotionally with it the same way I do Abbey Road and other Beatles records, but from a pure creativity standpoint, this thing is pretty ridiculous. Going behind In a Silent Way on the board here. Number 15, it's Illmatic by Nas. There are very few hip-hop albums that carry the reputation Illmatic does, and after finally giving it a re-listen, it's pretty easy to understand why. Released on April 19th, 1994, it's one of, if not the defining record of East Coast rap, and one of the greatest debut albums in music history, if not the best. Nas paints such vivid pictures of life in kind of New York and the East Coast that every verse feels very cinematic. Pairing him with excellent production was incredible. At just 10 tracks, there's zero wasted space here. It doesn't overstay its welcome by any means, and every song feels essential. New York State of Mind, obviously everybody knows that one, but The World Is Yours has always been, I think, my personal favorite. Perfect balance of introspection and ambition, with one of the sickest beats I've ever heard. One of those rare albums where the hype actually undersells how good it is a little bit. Perhaps I've even undersold it myself in the past, but it completely earns its place among the greatest records ever made. Going behind The College Dropout on the board here. Number 14, it's Lift Your Skinny Fists Like Antennas to Heaven by Godspeed You Black Emperor. The most insufferable person you know loves this album more than anything on this planet. Sadly, dear viewer, they're either correct, or I'm the most insufferable person you know, and that would break my little heart. Lift Your Skinny Fists Like Antennas to Heaven is a post-rock masterpiece delivered by Godspeed You Black Emperor on October 9th, 2000. Epic is a word I'd use to describe this record, no matter how old that makes me sound. Very grand album across the board, only 4 songs, but each one near 20 minutes in length. Each one structurally a masterpiece, musically a masterpiece, and even thematically masterpieces. Very hard-hitting album, for reasons I can't really describe. The sheer beauty captured here, even with the absence of much lyricism, just echoes how kind of unreally beautiful this music is. Tracks like Sleep and Storm, both easy contenders for the greatest song of all time, but even the other tracks here just have such surreal moments of beauty and melancholy baked into them. It's a genuinely unreal listen. I understand why people don't like this, but I think it's a project worth a glance at the very least. 14 feels a little low to a guy like me, but again, I get it. Behind Long Season on my board here. Number 13, it's The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust by David Bowie. One of the earliest rock operas ever released, so another album perhaps boosted by its unreal influence on the future of music. Once again, I'm not here to fight that. I enjoy this album a lot. I think it's one of the coolest concept records I've ever heard, and the execution is really fucking good. Really strong progression throughout the album, and of course, some all-time classic tracks from Mr. Bowie, like Starman and Rock and Roll Suicide, my two personal favorites from the album. It's very personal, I think, in a weird way. He kind of uses this pseudonym to connect with himself on a strange level, in a way that I think a lot of other rock stars kind of struggle to do. It's a very human project, which I think beautifully kind of contrasts with the concept of the album. One of the most creative pieces I've ever heard. Might be a little high for a guy like me, but I get its spot in the top 50 for sure. Going above Elliott Smith on the board here. Number 12, it's Remainin' Light by Talking Heads. Probably the most adventurous album in the Talking Heads catalog, and one that somehow gets more fun every time I listen to it. Released on October 8th, 1980, it takes the band's quirky new wave sound and kind of expands upon that a little bit. It turns it into this blend of funk, Afrobeat, and electronic, and borderline shenanigans at points. Production is fantastic, but Dave and Byrne and the gang are dominating here as well. It's definitely not the easiest listen on this list. There are moments where it feels like you're on some weird fucked up acid trip, but once it clicks, it's really damn good. Born Under Punches, Cross-Eyed and Painless, Houses in Motion are all fantastic, of course, but once in a lifetime, the obvious highlight, and I think for good reason. One of the greatest songs ever written, somehow still isn't the only thing that makes this album special. It's a record that completely reinvented what music could kind of sound like. And 40 plus years later, it still feels a little ahead of its time. Going above the Beach Boys on the board here.
She's so
Number 11, it's Abbey Road by the Beatles. I'm not going to spend a crazy amount of time on this one. I'm sure you've heard it by now, and if you haven't, you're probably not going to. Easily the Beatles' strongest project, though. Released on September 26, 1969. Effectively closing the Beatles' catalog. I say effectively because Let It Be does in fact exist, but I like to pretend it doesn't. Some absolute classic tracks that'll make your uncle leap out of his seat and start clapping like a seal. Think Something, Here Comes the Sun, but even some of the more underrated tracks. Note I say underrated, but that's not a term that can be used to describe the Beatles in any facet. Tracks like I Want You, a bit more to chew on, kind of further displays the talent these four motherfuckers really had. I think it's the album that best displays that, or perhaps most directly. It's not nearly as disjointed as the White Album, but it simultaneously tackles a lot of those same sound scopes. Just kind of cleaning them up and polishing them a little bit. Incredibly cohesive project in spite of that. Brilliant stuff from these Beatles guys. Going above Mingus on the board here. Number 10, it's Loveless by My Bloody Valentine. Ass.
Watch the drop top poppy known as the grimy, limey, slimy, try.
Number 9, it's Mad Villainy by Mad Villain. On to my personal favorite hip-hop project of the top 50, the legendary Mad Villainy by the late and great MF Doom and Madlib, who quite frankly as of late has not been quite as great. Released on March 23, 2004, easily one of the most unique and influential hip-hop pieces ever made. It's described as experimental hip-hop, which will immediately send a shiver down anyone who's ever tried to listen to Death Grip's Spine. But it's a far more accessible project than those. A brilliant concept record telling the tale of a villain. I honestly believe Doom is the singular greatest lyricist to have ever lived, and it's no more apparent than on this album, I think. Unrivaled creativity throughout this entire project. Who the fuck else drops a bar about Doritos, Cheetos, and Fritos? That's not even to mention the legendary production here from Madlib. So fast-paced and yet so kind of accessible at the same time. Tracks like Rhinestone Cowboy and Fancy Clown, probably my two favorites, but there's genuinely not a bad moment on this album. Even the interludes and skits fit just so well, I can't even complain. Everything about this is borderline perfect. This is a must-listen, I'm afraid. Going behind Lift Your Skinny Fists on the board here. At number 8, it's The Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. If I had to name one singular culprit that spiraled my love for music today, and truthfully this channel you're watching today, it just might be The Dark Side of the Moon. Pink Floyd's first legendary album, I'd say. Metal was cool, but let's get real, dear viewer. A progressive rock masterpiece, and one of the first of its kind in its sheer production and kind of concept. It's an album that I genuinely believe has a message for everyone. Where that is on the album kind of depends on who you are. Tracks like Time and Brain Damage, probably my two personal favorites, but really the entire album is so incredibly personal and existential in a way. It's so profoundly deep and authentic, and so vividly displays the struggles that kind of everyone goes through. The passage of time, the unnecessary wars, the addictions, the corporate greed, and yet it ends on this glimmer of hope, this message that the light is kind of blocked by the darkness, the sun is eclipsed by the moon, but the sun's still there. Genuinely an album I'll never forget having heard for the first time. Going behind Disintegration on the board. Number 7, it's Kid A by Radiohead. Radiohead's first appearance in the top 50, but unsurprisingly not their last. Radiohead's a strange band because their sound transformed so vastly over the years. You look at A Moon-Shaped Pool and Pablo Honey, and it's genuinely impossible to tell it's the same band. Kid A is often described as the biggest left turn in music history. Released on October 2nd, 2000, following the unquantifiable success of OK Computer, a far more by-the-books rock album in comparison to this project. Radiohead took a massive risk and headed in an electronic direction, and in doing so, released another cult classic record. Tracks like Everything in Its Right Place and Idiotech serve as some of the electronic genre's highest peaks, to be honest, but that's not even mentioning what's widely considered the band's magnum opus, How to Disappear Completely. A track that hardly fits in with the sound scope of this record, but it's a far more grand and orchestral piece, but it's one of the most unbelievably beautiful and haunting songs I've ever heard. A song about anxiety, about fear, so beautifully performed and managed. It's a genuinely unreal listen. The rest of the album is more of that electronic style, but it's also cohesive and unique in its own regard. Every song here is pretty damn fantastic. Probably my least favorite of the big three Radiohead albums. That's not really a slight by any means. Going behind Vespertine on the board here.
I woke up this morning and figured I'd call you in case I'm not here tomorrow. I'm hoping that I can borrow.
Number 6, it's Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick Lamar's legendary sophomore album, The Great Good Kid, Mad City. Another one of the greatest concept albums ever recorded, with just an absurd amount of passion poured into it. An incredibly introspective project as well, something Kendrick Lamar's work is often highly praised for, but this album perhaps even more so than his other works. Very personal piece about prejudice and his struggles during his upbringing, but it's an album that really has something for everyone. The iconic hits you'll hear on the radio like Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe and Money Trees, the deep-cutting personal pieces like Sam I Dot and Good Kid. It's one of the most diverse and powerful hip-hop albums ever released, I think. Sam I Dot especially, probably my favorite song from the guy, period, really just dives into his psyche as he pours his thoughts into a song. A song of anxiety and fear concluded with a message of hope, or at least his own personal light at the end of the tunnel. Legendary record once again. Going behind Kind of Blue on the board here. Number 5, it's In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson, often regarded as the birth of prog rock. At the very least, the birth of prog rock you and I love. An album cover everyone has seen but far less have heard. It also serves as King Crimson's debut record, which is fucking nuts. Released on October 10th of 1969, this one predating any of the legendary prog rock albums you can think of. Been sampled by Kanye, it's been praised as the greatest album of all time, and minus one slight 12-minute long hold, the rest of the album is absurdly good. Even Moonchild has a little charm in the full context of the album. My personal favorite here is Epitaph, which I find to just be one of the most serenely beautiful rock songs I've ever heard, both from a lyrical standpoint and a musical one. An album so jam-packed with sound, never a dull moment on this project, minus that weird 12-minute gap between tracks 3 and 5, but it's an album with a brilliant concept and even more brilliant execution. Masterfully produced in spite of its 1969 release date, and carried out by some of the most talented musicians to have ever lived in the prime of their lives. Yet another GOAT, going above Red on the board here.
How I wish you were here.
At number 4, it's Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. Though In the Court was the beginning of prog rock, I believe the genre hit its height right here on Wish You Were Here. An album incredibly personal to the band, written as a tribute to ex-band member Syd Barrett, who had, for the lack of a better term, gone bonkers. Though its message is personal to the band, it's also a very easy one to relate to. It's an album about missing someone, about longing for a return to that person, to once again connect and to enjoy their presence. Songs like Wish You Were Here serve as people's tributes to the dead, songs of grief and longing, but every other track is just as fucking good. The near 30-minute Shine On You Crazy Diamond, perhaps the peak of prog rock genre entirely, or perhaps the peak of music entirely, in its genuinely baffling scale and structure. The build-up to these explosions of noise, while simpler than something like Starless, they pack that exact same punch. Ludicrously good album. Top of the board for Wish You Were Here. At number 3, it's In Rainbows by Radiohead. Radiohead's penultimate appearance on the list, and that I agree with. Not quite their best project in my eyes, but damn close to it in quality. A much softer piece than you got from earlier Radiohead, but beautifully displays the band's progression over the last 20 years. A very atmospheric record, creating another relatively surreal sense of beauty throughout. Tracks like Weird Fishes and Jigsaw, some obvious highlights, but almost this entire record is flawless. I'm not a Faust Arp fan, to be honest, and I've never been huge on House of Cards. But every other song feels absolutely necessary in the band's vision for this album. It is an album without a concept, which I think is interesting at this point in the list. If you've been playing along at home, you may have noticed a lot of this list is dominated by concept albums. This album doesn't really tell a story. It just creates an ethereal beauty with each track kind of building off the last. The floatiness of tracks like Nude to the desperation of tracks like All I Need. It's an album that has something for everyone. Peak shit once again. Behind Dark Side on the board here. At number 2, it's OK Computer by Radiohead, comfortably Radiohead's greatest album of all time and a personal favorite of mine. Released on May 21st, 1997, and effectively predicting the next 30 years of technological advancements. It's a terrifying album, to be honest, incredibly cold and dystopian throughout, but that's obviously what they set out to do. It creates this atmosphere of a dystopia better than really any other piece of art I've ever seen. Tracks like Climbing Up the Walls and No Surprises just echoing this anxiety-inducing feeling, this coldness. It's another album with zero skips, minus Fit or Happier, but it's tough to count that one. And even that track serves a brilliant purpose within the album. Like I said, it's an incredibly dark piece through and through, creating a thought-provoking track with each song while doing it. Tracks like Let Down and Paranoid Android, some of the greatest songs ever recorded in two completely different ways. Every song ties back to this concept of dystopia and yet has its own scope of sound. No surprises with its kind of slower pace compared to Paranoid Android with its almost schizophrenic nature. It's an album unlike any other I've ever heard, and it doesn't even really make sense. On paper, this probably shouldn't work, but the motherfuckers just willed it to be. And in doing so, wrote maybe the greatest album of all time. Depends on the day of the week you ask me. Top of the board for OK Computer.
When shit hit the fan, is you still a fan? The ghost of Mandela, hope my flow stay propelling.
And at number 1, it's To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. Not really too much to argue here. It's one of the few things Album of the Year and Rate Your Music seem to agree on pretty wholeheartedly. This is the greatest album of all time. Do I agree? Well, no, but I certainly see the case. Released on March 15th, 2015, right at the height of racial turmoil in America. Off the back of Good Kid, Mad City, to say expectations were high for Mr. Lamar would be a terrible understatement. To then say he surpassed those expectations would also be a terrible understatement. A brilliant concept album telling an absolutely necessary story at the time, right when the world kind of needed it most. It's angry, it's aggressive, but it's simultaneously introspective. Not just screaming at the world, it's deliberately pointing out these injustices he's faced firsthand, while also tackling what it's done to him as a person. What the societal pressures have caused him to do, and how he now views himself off the back of Good Kid, Mad City's success, and how he's evolved through that. Tracks like Wesley's Theory and How Much a Dollar Cost, probably my two favorites, but once again, you can't really go wrong here. It's 80 minutes of pure rap genius, coupled with incredible production, to deliver this massively influential piece of political hip-hop. Indescribably good album. I absolutely understand why this is as revered as it is. It's not my personal GOAT, but it's not an album I really relate to as, once again, the whitest person you know. Behind Dark Side on my personal board here. And that takes us to the end. Take it in all its glory, dear viewer. The correct and without error top 50 albums according to Rate Your Music, revised by some random guy on the internet. Thank you very much for watching to the end. Subscribe for more music, hullabaloo. Follow my Twitch if you fuck with a fella like me. And I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.